Thank you very much for the invitation. The first thing is to say I'm not a professional dowser. In a job that I got over 40 years ago, I went to work in Libya and was assigned to a coastal municipality to look at, this is in the days when Libya was a proper functioning state, and they were doing an enormous amount of infrastructure development, which is why they were hiring architects and engineers from Europe. While I was there, I heard a BBC World Service program about water divining, and I was interested to hear that the presenters said that a very large proportion of the population would find that they were able to do it. Now, having read Guy Underwood's Pattern of the Past, and also having read The Old Straight Track, I thought it'd be worth a try. And I happened to be working very close to a couple of enormous remains of Roman cities, Leptis Magna, which is just east of Tripoli, and Sabratha, which is just west of Tripoli. So I tried out dowsing, and these are some extracts from my notebook at the time. I found that a little frond of a palm leaf would actually make quite a good sprung Y frond, and started investigating what reactions I could get. I found that I could follow watercourses, and in walking through the remains of Roman cities, which were completely open and accessible to anybody who just wanted to walk in, I got consistent reactions along what I assumed at the time were water lines, and started plotting these in relation to buildings. Now, because I wasn't sure exactly what it was I was picking up, I contacted Nina Earle, who put me in touch with Sue Brown of the Dowsing Research Group, who very kindly gave me a lot of her time just to reassure me that I was dowsing something that had real meaning in terms of archaeology and remains below the ground. And she took me up to the High Down Hill, Worthing, and I was able to confirm that what I was dowsing was actually quite consistent with what she was picking up on archaeological remains, which were not visible at the ground surface, but I was able to follow the same outlines. The right-hand image gives an image of the modified palm fronds that I tended to use. If I cut a single leaf off a palm frond and then cut away its spine, it actually gave a very neatly sprung Y rod, which worked very well for dowsing. This is an image of the basilica in Leptis Magna, and it's just an indication of the scale of the remains. And similarly, the theatre at Sabratha on the western side of Tripoli. So again, a little example of some notes, field notes, sketches of the mason's marks, and if you can see the cursor, I'm picking up the intersection of some lines with a wall and drawing the mason's mark that happened to coincide with that point of intersection. The drawing is at Leptis, but the photograph on the right is actually at the just north of the theatre in Sabratha, and I found that the same marks appeared. Now, it's conceivable they're about 50 or 60 kilometers apart, so it's perfectly possible that the same mason might have traveled from one site to another. And these are more examples from Sabratha, just south of the Byzantine wall, which was 50 meters east of the Punic mausoleum. If I zoom in on the little sketch here, I'm picking up mason's marks, and the dot dash lines here indicate where the dowsing lines were actually intersecting with the wall. The notebook is just full of examples like this. And then you see the same marks here in the photograph, sort of a trident mark was one of them. And in Tunisia, while I was in Libya, it was obviously very easy to take a holiday in Tunisia. There are, again, lots of Roman remains, not just Carthage, but there's a very large city called Douga. And on the paving, in the image on the right, you can just make out a very large circular engraved windrows, which I've drawn on the left. The principal axes were coinciding with dowsing lines, and some of them were extrapolated as far as 10 meters away from the actual main circle of the windrows. There are other features, again, which coincided with dowsing lines. If we look at the top left of the notebook sketches, at the intersections of lines here, there was this feather symbol, and there were 4 dowsing lines. Generally speaking, if I mark a line with a D, I was getting a down reaction with the Y rod. And intersection with another line here was this sort of feather symbol. A similar intersection coinciding with these series of etched arc lines. And in context, they're in this top right-hand photograph. The images, the engravings themselves are actually upside down in this. So for comparison, I've inverted the photograph here, top center, so you can just compare them with the sketch in the field notes. Now, there's such an enormous amount of material. I had a lot of time there, and every weekend I would go off to the Roman remains or into the edge of the Sahara Desert, where there are innumerable Roman farms, because in those days, 2,000 years ago, it was actually a very fertile country. So this is just a snapshot of some of the contents of my field notebooks. That one, for example, is the notebook related to the windrows at Douga. So I'll just pick some examples of the investigations. This is the amphitheatre in Leptis Magna. It was partially restored. You can see there's an awful lot of the original masonry which is not restored in any way at all. So I started just to make a survey of the overall form of it. And what I was particularly interested in was to identify those parts which were not restored. So I picked a particular quadrant of the original masonry which had not been restored, and made a detailed survey of the various stones with the marks on them, and turned that into a grid for reference. The seat rows and numbers and risers are going up the slope of the amphitheatre on the left, and along the bottom axis are the horizontal numbering of the rows of seats. The little zigzag lines and the second line up are indicating the dowsing responses, which generally speaking I'd get an up, down, up response, sometimes just an up. and sometimes this sort of zigzag response with the Y rod. Now, there were so many coincidences with the mason's marks are marked on the various stones higher up, but in a way there's too much to actually look for any meaningful interpretation of these. So I've found it much more fruitful to concentrate on isolated single marks where the coincidence with dowsing responses appear to be much more meaningful. There are also buildings where there were no mason's marks, such as the very rough rubble, it's almost rubble masonry of a Roman dam at Wadi Majinin. Wadi, the new course of the Wadi is in the right-hand side of the photograph, and of course most of the year it's dry. But in Roman times, dams were much more meaningful because of much more regular rainfall in the climate of those times. The top right-hand image is a fairly careful survey of the form of the dam, and the notebook on the top left shows the dotted lines, and the dot dash lines show the various dowsing lines that I was picking up. What's interesting is that they coincide with the main features of the dam. Obviously, the main alignment of the barrage itself corresponded with dowsing lines, some of which were extrapolated, and the main buttresses also coincided with dowsing lines, which are running vertically in this particular sketch. So the interesting question is, and I don't know the answer to this, was whether one can distinguish cause and effect, whether the presence of the dowsing lines actually was a prompt for the Roman engineers telling them where to build, or whether the structures themselves are actually generating the dowsing response. And hopefully some of your members may have the answer to that. There's a lot of jumping about here. This is going to Delphi, and the stadium above the oracle. I found a dowsing response just where I'm standing at the photograph, and I noticed an alignment of what I call bosses, these little protuberances on the steps, and they formed a line which was projected towards where I was standing and got the dowsing response. Similarly, there are other little bosses along the bottom riser of the bottom row of seats, and they also corresponded with dowsing responses. The image on the right is called the omphalos, and it's in the Greek mythology, that is perceived as being the navel of the world. And we jump to Egypt. I'm jumping about over more than 40 years of explorations in all different countries of the world. I'm not going to cover everything tonight, but this is just an example from Egypt, where I was visiting in 2006. And the interesting thing was that I was just walking along the foundation, beside the foundations of this temple wall with the dowsing rods, and it was only after the reaction that I got that I looked to my side to see if they coincided with any mason's marks, and sure enough, they did. There's this one which is like a Greek theta, another one at low level, and others. This one's like a sort of feather or double arrow, triple arrowhead, and an upward arrow. And more recently, we visited Iran, and a great advantage of travelling on an Irish passport is that you're free to go wherever you want. You don't have to have a chaperone telling you where you may or may not go. And at the Jehel Sultan Palace in Shiraz, I noticed a lot of mason's marks on the large vertical stones along this face, so that the little red rings indicate where the mason's marks occurred, and they all coincide with dowsing lines. And then in the paving, various places, top right, you can see a little mason's mark in the paving, another one here, and another one at the bottom. These are all in paving, and coincide with mason's marks. Also in Iran, there's this wonderful, it's really barely remnants, just the barest ruins of the Maraghe Observatory. This was built in the mid-13th century under the patronage of Ilkhanid Hulagu, who was Genghis Khan's grandson. And the director of the observatory was Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, or Nasruddin Tusi, who was an eminent Persian mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher. Now, there were no mason's marks visible on this. You can see it's very rough masonry, but nevertheless, the outlines of the walls all coincided with dowsing responses. And just below the plateau on which the Maraghe Observatory sits is a Mithra temple that was cut into the rock in the 7th century BC. The origin of Mithra in the Zoroastrian language or culture, which is called Avesta, Mer is the god, and in Old Persian was called Mithra. In Pahlavi language, it was also called Mithr. So in Avesta, Mer was considered to be one of the creators of Ahura Mazda, and it was the Yazats or Izad of contract and promise, hence the god of light. And Zoroastrian religion obviously is all about light and fire and brightness. The god of light, because nothing was kept secret from him. Mithraism then extended into Babylon and Asia Minor from Iran, and eventually reached Europe, courtesy of Roman soldiers. Now, the thing that was interesting about this temple was I was getting very strong dowsing reaction on all the axial lines, both the central axis and also on the axes of the side chambers. No mason's marks visible in this case. And a similar story in this other Mithra temple, which was a subterranean, also a complex of subterranean tombs at Varjavi. And on the little sketch on the left, you can see a dot dash line which indicates the dowsing reaction, which was on axis of the central space. And we went to Persepolis, a couple of pages from my field notes, and that's on the left-hand page of the notes, and the Yazd Towers of Silence on the right-hand page. So we'll look at Persepolis first. The tomb of Artaxerxes II, which is above the main town of Persepolis, is a rock rock-cut tomb. And I found a dowsing reaction, which was a line intersecting the wall at a number of places. In one location, there was this very prominent boss left in the cutting of the rock face, and in 3 other locations there were these little niches or notches cut at the base of the rock cut wall. And the the so-called Kaaba of Naqsh Rustam, which is just beside the tombs of the Achaemenid kings. There are a number of theories about what its purpose was, but in some ways it's a bit like the Kaaba that is in Saudi Arabia, which is where all the Muslims will make their pilgrimages. So literally it just means that the cube, the sacred cube, the cube of Zoroaster. The little diagram bottom right just shows that I was getting dowsing reactions on the 2 principal axes of the Kaaba. The Towers of Silence in Yazd is where the Zoroastrians dispose of their dead. The corpses are laid out in 3 circles within these circular towers. Men on the outside, women in the middle, and children in the central circle. And once the bones have been discarnated, they're finally put into a central pit. And I think the cleaning of those bones is actually done with lime. Now, the interesting thing about these was simply that the axes of the main entrances were on dowsing lines, and I was picking up further dowsing reactions. If you just, I don't know if I can just try and zoom in on this. These are plans of the 2 towers, and there were dowsing reactions just east of north and at about 70 degrees on this one, and similarly on the other one. Again, just a little bit not far from east. They're very similar diameter. One had a much larger pit in the middle and the other one was smaller. Now we jump to South America. Inca masonry, this is quite untypical of Inca masonry because it's very rectilinear, orthogonal blocks cut in very hard igneous rock. Most of it is granite, and it's quite remarkable that it's actually survived numerous earthquakes. Most of the Spanish masonry that was built all too often on top of the sacred sites of the Inca would fall down at the first earthquake. Now the notebook on the right is actually related to the next chamber beside this one in the photograph, and looking at the detail in the red circle, there were 3 holes at floor level. The first thing to say is that all the bosses on the stones, because if you notice, not every stone has bosses on it, but these generally coincided with the location of dowsing responses intersecting the walls. Looking in particular at the 3 holes at floor level, which are marked here, I then walked out to the street outside and walked along what I thought was a similar location. And I got a dowsing response and looked to my right and found the 3 holes running through the wall. So the dowsing responses are marked with the sort of V symbols here. And also, this was also a blind test. Funny little boss on this stone here coincided with the dowsing response. The holes actually ran right through the wall at floor level in the interior. This is much more typical of Inca masonry, polygonal and impeccably fitted together in very hard stone, generally igneous granite type of rock. And again, the location of the bosses, which don't occur on all the stones by any means, but they all coincided with dowsing responses. Also, just above Cusco, there's an enormous complex which looks like a sort of fortified town and complex of temples, the Sacsayhuaman ruins, Inca masonry. The little V's marked on the photographs here correspond with the dowsing responses, so they coincide with either waterways, little drain holes, or drain channels. And in the right-hand image, you could say that that's an image of a serpent. The serpent and the condor, of course, are the sacred symbols of the Inca. And at Machu Picchu, there's a temple of the condor, which is the right-hand image. You could take this as being the beak of the condor, and again it corresponds with a dowsing reaction marked by the V on the image. All the other niches and bosses that appear in the stonework all coincided with dowsing responses. And then in Bolivia, at the Pumapunku at Tiwanaku, these are 6th century terraced platforms. It's an enormous site. The total area is about 17 hectares, and only 2 of the platforms have been excavated to date. There are 2 more underground. Pumapunku means the gate of the puma, and it's the site where the world was created in their mythology. You'll see on the riser stones on the left-hand image, again, there are bosses which correspond with dowsing responses. The stone is incredibly hard, and if you look at the central bottom image, and I'll see if I can zoom in on that, there's a pencil, my pencil just sitting on top of the cut, so it's about 5 or 6 millimeters wide. It's got perfectly formed internal 90-degree angles, and it's the sort of thing that you could only do with the diamond saw these days. So it's a complete mystery how these masons actually formed this. It's pre-Inca, of course. I walked to the back of this terrace, and there's a drainage channel on the right-hand image here running down, which runs into another transverse drainage panel. The red stone there actually has, if I can zoom in on it, it has a spiral pattern, and again another sort of serpent image. I'm not sure if that stone has been moved. It's difficult to tell, but it's right beside the 2 water channels. Some of the stones, and these are generally thought to be in red sandstone, some of them weigh up to 131 tons. and they were transported 10 kilometers from the source that was identified beside Lake Titicaca. And some of the other stones are in andesite. There is, of course, speculation as to whether or not they were manufactured with a geopolymer rather than being cut from a quarry. Now we're jumping to Portugal, to Sintra. The Palacio Real has a number of mason's marks on it. This is just a couple of examples. These are taken either side of a doorway opening, and there was I found a dowsing reaction running across the opening. And to Istanbul, the Topkapi Palace, in the courtyard Mabane by the harem, there are these peculiar little grooves cut in the paving, and they look as though they're designed to function as drainage grooves, but the line that they follow seems rather random, and I found that actually they followed a dowsing reaction line. And in Hagia Sophia, also in Istanbul, if you look very carefully in some of the door openings, these doors are actually closed. They're not in current use, but looking carefully at the sides of the door openings, you can see little mason's marks. And these, again, they coincide with dowsing reactions running across the openings. Also in Hagia Sophia, at the column bases and also around the walls. I thought this is like the Greek letter phi. Another one looking like an M. And on the wall, the outside wall, again, this looks like a Greek pi. Some of these are not very carefully cut, and they almost look like vandalism. You'd think that if they were done by the masons who actually produced these beautifully carved pedestals, that they would have been done with a bit more precision. So it's difficult to understand the motive behind them being carved there. And then very close by is an enormous Roman cistern. It covers about 9,800 square meters, and it could store an enormous volume of water to serve the whole city in Roman times. So that's about 2.4 acres. It's made in the 6th century. There are 336 columns in it, and I noticed again mason's marks, but also some quite prominent bosses, again coinciding with dowsing responses. Another mason's mark at the base, and again a very prominent boss. Now most of the columns have actually been salvaged and reused from elsewhere, so one wonders how conscious the decision was to leave these little lumps of stone when they were being carved. Now jumping to further east in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. What's quite frustrating about this is since they've really boosted their tourism of this site. You're not actually allowed to walk into the site itself. I mean, that's perfectly understandable because of its delicacy and preciousness. So you're only allowed to walk around the edge on this elevated walkway. But what I did was just tested the dowsing reactions as I walked around, and you get lots of these. This incidentally was made, is thought to have been made before the days of agriculture, but it must have involved an enormous amount of collective work. The monoliths, which are generally in pairs, are about 3 meters tall, and they have carved symbols on them, which are like sort of animals or abstract images. So as I walked around, I found that I was getting a dowsing reaction on the axes of these pairs of monoliths. And in Cappadocia, there are a number of rock-cut churches. This is Yusuf Koch church. When we went there, we stumbled upon a photo shoot, hence the model standing in what might have been the altar. But there were strong dowsing reactions centrally on the main nave and along the side aisles. And again in Turkey, this is in Kayseri, the Church of the Virgin Mary, which was built in very early 17th century. A lot of odd marks on the walls, with incised arcs and sometimes little sort of three-dimensional marks, again all coinciding with dowsing responses. That's the exterior of the church. And then the final slide, we end up back in Rome. It was just 3 years ago. We were walking around Rome, and this is the Porta Pinciana. And again, looking for dowsing reactions, I noticed a dowsing reaction on each side of the gateway, and then looking carefully in detail, you can see these little bosses on this side, which corresponded with a dowsing reaction marked with a V, and similarly on the other side. So that's the end of the images. Thank you for your attention.
So can I say, have you done any dowsing in Ireland, the UK in general, and found similar results?
Well, yes, I haven't done it to the same extent of detail, but I would get dowsing responses on just on the axes of say medieval churches and things like that. But I haven't done such detailed research, and I would hope to be able to do that in the future.
Simon, could you stop sharing the screen, please?
Yeah.
There we are. Thank you. I'll go back to. Can everybody see each other?
Yep.
Okay. Back to. We're back in the room.
Cecilia's got her hand up, Richard.
Okay. Cecilia, would you like to come in? If you unmute, please. Yes, can you unmute yourself, Cecilia? No, you're still muted.
And now?
Yes, there we are.
Okay, so I don't know how to see myself, but anyway, I found that really very interesting. A few years ago here, when I live in Argentina, about 300 kilometers away, there's a place called Achiras, and we were passing by, we went to the stream, and there was these very big sort of, they were almost lava-like stones, slabs, and they had a lot of circles or holes made into them. And from what I could find out was that it was a meeting place for the Indians, and the holes were where they were grind the corn, which they ate afterwards. I haven't done much dowsing in that sense as far as you have, but this is very interesting, and I think it's going to help me be on the lookout. Thank you.
Stuart down.
Yeah, hi there. Hello, Simon. Thank you for a
Hi.
wonderful talk. Absolutely illuminating. I've often had my own doubts about Mason's marks from a childhood onwards. I always thought there's something a little bit curious going on with them, and I was told that they're for levels. It's for datum marks and all the rest of it. And I thought, no, I've seen some different ones. There's more to it than that. But considering them as that they have a resonance, whether the resonance was there and then the mark was made to it, or whether the mark created the resonance, is the chicken and the egg question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think. And
Well,
go on.
That one might wonder how such a small incision as a mason's mark, which is incised in a slab of stone, could have such a significant effect. But it certainly occurred to me in relation to significant structures like the Roman dams.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that in dowsing around about here, I'm picking up reactions which seem to coincide with edges of buildings. So it may be, I'm not sufficiently expert or experienced. I'm certainly not a professional dowser to be able to distinguish what we might call cause from effect.
Yeah. That's a bit how I feel too. And I do a bit of dowsing and find that there's a foundation underneath that I didn't know about. So I think I don't know. There's one other point that I thought I'd mention. If you're looking for dowsing marks in this country that are Mason's marks, either side of the western end of Rosslyn Chapel, either side of the doorway, are two Mason's marks, one either side. I haven't got the photograph with me now, so I can't exactly remember what shape they were, but they were definitely Mason's marks on their own, scratched onto that section of both sections of wall either side, and coincide exactly where the energy line comes in from the west and through the church.
Yeah, well, that sounds very consistent with what I'm finding.
And I was thrilled to find that. That was back in 2016 when I was up there. Oh, golly, yes. So, yeah, thank you very much. And a little bit of confirmation here going on, isn't there?
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Could I invite Michael Yule?
Yes, hello. Thank you. It was very interesting. And I was wondering, when you were getting dowsing reactions that led to the bosses on the various structures, I was wondering whether those reactions were exclusive to the locations where there were bosses, or were there a number of other reactions that you got associated with the same structure, but that did not lead to bosses? What I'm trying to understand is whether it was exclusively associated with bosses, or whether it was a percentage of them that led to bosses.
That's a good question. I didn't go around looking for reactions, other than when I was doing what I called a blind test. So I'd be walking alongside a wall until I got a reaction and then look and find the mark. I think if I'd found lots of reactions with no mark, I would have, I might have questioned what I was doing. But
Yes.
I found it gratifyingly consistent that I was getting reactions at the marks and the bosses.
Of course. Thank you. That's very interesting. I may try something along the same lines here in Italy, where we have a fair amount of Roman ruins, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, Linda Burnell, please.
Hi, Simon. I found that really exciting and interesting, and I envy the chance that you've had to go to those places and to dowse. I mean, I just really envy that. I found it really interesting because right at the beginning of my dowsing, I first came across those marks linked to reactions, and then spent the rest of my life finding out what those reactions are or were. I've been trying to dowse very quickly as you were putting the images up, but they were passing through so quickly. But I managed to do a few before you moved on to the next ones. And I was getting all sorts of reasons why the reactions were there. Sometimes it was energy, sometimes it was water, sometimes the water was underground, sometimes it was above ground. There were so many reasons. And when you were dowsing, did you learn or start to use questions to find out what your reactions were to?
No, I've signed up for a dowsing course with Guy Underwood this summer and John Baker. Yeah. So it's something I should have done years and years ago. I'm afraid I'm total amateur. So
you don't have to be anymore, because the dowsing itself will give you the answers. So you just need to find your reactions with the dowsing tool. Yeah. Ask the question and just keep checking that you're getting the same answer. And that's very simple to do. And whenever I'm teaching people to dowse, I say, don't go to a book, ask the dowsing rod and it will teach you. The dowsing will teach you when you're ready to learn what you need to learn.
Thank you.
So that was, you've got so much information there. It's just, I just think it's amazing. I'm really pleased to have that you gave us this talk.
Thank you for the suggestion. I've been very wary of one's suggestibility. I think if hopefully I'll have enough confidence to ask the questions after the dowsing course.
Okay. Helen, you had your hand up, Helen, but it's gone now. Are you still there?
No, I was going to ask the same question actually, whether it was a reaction or whether there was a question asked on what was being asked. So that was answered. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments?
Richard, Martin here.
Hello, Martin.
I couldn't find out how to put my hand up, so I beg your pardon, I couldn't do that. So Simon, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I tried doing a little bit of dowsing myself as you spoke, because I don't do it any more than you know, other than I've heard things in the past of other things. I'm trying to marry together the bits you've said with the bits I've heard before. Now, I get the impression that in ancient times, people were a lot more familiar with what today we simply call earth energies and don't follow that any further. And that they relate a lot of these to the stone structures they built. So in some cases, stone structures, if you like, were built as energy machinery, even if we don't know what that purpose was. Yeah. And as I was dowsing, as you were speaking, I got the impression that, well, several impressions. One is often this dowsing machinery, this stonework, will attract energy lines. As you saw with the dam early on, you had the dam pits and the lines going into them. I think very often the stone itself attracts lines to it. So I think there's a definite interface between the stonework and energy flow of some sort. And dowsing on that particular point, the bosses, I think, were specifically tuning or have specific function with view to whatever that energy purpose was. So I'm not speaking as one with any knowledge, only what I'm making up as I go along. But I think those bosses may be something to do with focusing or the purpose of the energy purpose of the stonework. And you talk also about the maker's marks or the stonemason's marks. Dowsing again, because they don't seem consistent in any way with anything I was thinking. And I think there might be company marks. So if there were several quarries, let's say, producing stone for one particular structure, rather than every stone by a certain mason being given the mason's marks, it may have been that there was this part came from that quarry or that one. That's the nearest I can get to that, these company ID marks. But I also got that somehow or other, those ID marks do affect the energy. So the fact that you were getting an energy line to a mark also fits. But I'm putting this out now for other people listening to this to get dowsing and see if they can expand upon that. But that's what I've detected.
I think that's really interesting. You've certainly repeated one of the conventional interpretations of Mason's marks, which is that there are three basic purposes. One is that they're a quarry mark, or else they're what's called a bencher mark, which is made by the mason who cut it on the bench, ready to put it into the building. And that's like claiming his piecework for the day's work. And the third purpose is actually assembly marks, so that it tells you which stones go next to which other stones.
Yeah.
In relation to the bosses, there is also a conventional interpretation of the purpose of those, and it's certainly been spoken of by an archaeologist I've heard speaking about a Greek temple, which is that they were for the purpose of lifting the stones. There's a lot of speculation about how the Inca masons formed their polygonal masonry and got such a perfect fit. And one theory is that they have to keep lifting them, grind a little bit of the way of the stone below and try and fit it again, lift it again, and just work very gradually to get them to fit. So the purpose of lifting and lowering is one supposed explanation. I don't think they're very good for that purpose. And if that was the purpose, you'd expect to see them on all the stones.
Yes, I did dowse as I was doing that. Were they for lifting the stones? Were the bosses for that? It said no. So yeah. I went past that. Now, in terms of the South American stones that are all different shapes and fit so well together, my own theory is that the ancients had a technology, if you will, to vibrate the stone to make it malleable. And so the stones would soften and melt together like plasticine and then reset.
Yeah.
That's my theory. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Thanks.
Cecilia, you got your hand up again?
Yeah, referring to the relationship between what was first, what was, let's say, architecturally put there or structurally put there, and the relationship to the reaction of water. For example, when I studied dowsing with an engineer here in Argentina, he had gone to different sacred places. One of them here in Argentina in the north is what is left of a Jesuit church, which is San Ignacio Mini. And not only there, but in many places between the entrance to the sacred place and the altar, there is what is called an underground blind water stream, which is absolutely straight. And this goes straight for 25 meters. So it's really, you say, not usually streams don't go straight for 25 meters. So I strongly believe that there's always a relationship between what Earth perceives and what we're trying to do, and somehow there's a connection. Thank you.
Yeah.
You, Cecilia.
Richard, yeah, can I come back in on that? When I was taught to dowse some 30 years ago or so, I was amazed when the teacher showed me that having dowsed for wiring and water pipes in buildings and so on, he could put a cup of water down on the floor and 4 meters away put another cup of water down and prove that I could dowse a water line between the two cups, wherever they were. Now that line didn't exist, but the dowsing said it did. So there's a mystery there I don't understand, but I'm sure there could be a correlation here that there are lines between structures, but we don't know why they're there or how they appear, but they appear because of the structures, which is not ley lines because they have a different, raison d'etre.
Thank you, Martin. Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much then. It's been great. Thank you everyone's contribution, and thank you, Simon, for coming to give your talk. Very inspiring.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Simon.